Hi, I'm John Chisholm. I'm part of the executive leadership team here at the International House of Prayer in Kansas City, and I'm also part of give leadership to our Israel mandate. I wanted to take some time and just introduce you to the feasts and just try and give you some understanding. I want to talk to you about, just introduce you to them, give you some explanation about them, and then I want to try and answer the question about why they are important to us at the International House of Prayer and the FCF community. And so, first of all, I just want to run to Leviticus 23, and this is where we're introduced in the scriptures to them. But what's interesting is, here's what the Lord says. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the children of Israel, and say to them, the feasts of the Lord, which you shall proclaim to be holy convocations, these are my feasts." In other words, they're the Lord's feasts. And so, inasmuch as people say, hey, they're Jewish feasts, I just want to expand maybe your understanding to some of that. You know, the phrase that the Lord's used for the word feast here, it's called moed in Hebrew, and it's an appointment. So the feasts are about appointed times with God, to meet with God. And I think all of us would say, hey, I want to gain an understanding about how to keep my appointments with the Lord. And then the other word that I think is important is he calls them a holy convocation. The word there is mikra, which means it's a rehearsal. And so what that tells us is that they're significant even to the future. What's really, really important is that we understand about the feasts, not from just a Jewish perspective, but really from a messianic perspective, because it tells his story. It's a story of redemption. There's 7 feasts. There's 4 of them in the spring, and those feasts are Passover, unleavened bread, first fruits, and Pentecost. And then there's 3 in the fall, and that's trumpets, the Day of Atonement or Yom Kippur, and the Feast of Tabernacles. And we're about to step into the 3 fall feasts, so those are the ones that I'm going to be talking about today. But I want to give you, again, a general introduction to all of it. You know, some people say, you know, it's a Jewish calendar, and Bob Jones, the prophetic gentleman, used to say, well, actually, it's not just a Jewish calendar, it's Papa's calendar. It's the only one that he's ever given to anybody. And so that just might be important. And it becomes more important when we understand that in Jesus' first coming, he fulfills the 4 spring feasts. So when the Jewish people are celebrating the issue of Passover, and they're eating the lamb that was slain, the reality is the Lord laid down his life at that same timing. He fulfilled the feast. And again, I'm not going to go into all the spring feasts at this point. I want to go into the fall ones. But in his first coming, he fulfills all 4 of the spring feasts. And I believe, and many believe, that in his second coming, he'll fulfill the 3 fall ones. All right, so they're eschatological. They're all about him and his story. And they're eschatological. Now, as the feasts are being given to the Jewish people, they're a people of agriculture, they're an agrarian economy, and so the feasts tie into significant events that relate to agriculture, but the theme is really all about harvest, which I think should get our attention too, about how important that the Lord puts harvest in priority. You know, God's a storyteller. We see that so often in the scriptures. If he's trying to get a point across, whether it be the parables in Jesus' ministry or even what he took the Jewish people through in the Old Testament, he's telling a story. And the feasts tell a story. And that story points to Messiah. It points to Jesus. And so it becomes really, really important that we understand them for that reason. Here's Colossians 2:16 through 17. And so this is Paul saying, "So let no one judge you in food or drink, or regarding the feasts or a new moon or Sabbaths, which are a shadow of things to come, but the substance is of Christ." And so we're being informed here that the feasts are a shadow of what's to come. They point to something. And again, that's a New Testament verse. That's not an Old Testament verse. And that the feasts have insight for us about who he is and what he's doing. Now again, sometimes people challenge and say, you know, we're a Gentile community. Is this really important that we celebrate the feasts? And I don't believe there's any obligation for us to do it. I think as Gentiles, I don't think there's a demand on us. I don't think the scriptures teach that. But I do think there's insight for us. And I think there's insight for our community. And so I just want to share a couple of thoughts. One is the reality that we're a prophetic community, and the feasts are prophetic. They give us insight and story. They'll build up the church as you understand his redemptive storyline. And as I help you better understand the Feast of Trumpets and of Yom Kippur, Day of Atonement, and of Tabernacles, like there's insight about who he is and what burns in his heart. And so for that reason, because they're prophetic, I think we should be interacting with them. Not out of we have to, but I think there's insight. They're eschatological. We happen to be a very eschatological community. 150 chapters in the scriptures that talk about the time when the Lord returns. And we're in the midst of trying to better understand those scriptures because we think we're starting to step into that time and season, and the Lord wants to give us insight about that. The Lord wants us to cooperate with what he's doing. And so the feasts are going to also give us insight as it relates to eschatology. Now, there's not a set understanding exactly how these three fall feasts all fit in exactly. I think the Lord will give us insight as it gets closer. And we sure will be able to look back and say it's remarkable, again, in the spring feast that he fulfilled them on the day. Like, talk about a sovereign God, initiates the feast thousands of years in advance and then comes in his first coming and he fulfills them. I think the same dynamic is going to happen. Because we're a prophetic people, because we're an eschatological people, they're important. The other part that I think is just really important is we've been assigned as a community an assignment of raising up intercessors for Israel. And so one of the tools necessary to embrace that assignment is that we would have God's heart for the Jewish people and that we would have understanding about God's purposes for the Jewish people. And so in the feasts, it will stir up your heart. All right, the feasts are very important to the Jewish people. We're called to relate to them. We're called to bless and honor them. And so us having greater understanding about those feasts, those can be even a connection to the Jewish community. But also, God, what are your heart? What is your heart towards Israel? What is your heart? And in the feast, we join the Jewish people in a way. And again, I think it's a prophetic act more than it's any set assignment. And because they're eschatological, I think they're important. You know, as a community at the International House of Prayer, we hear a lot about he's a bridegroom, he's a king, and he's a judge. And in the three fall feasts, those three themes are the themes of the feast. The first feast we're going to come into is trumpets. And the reality is there comes a time when there's a shofar blast and he returns. And so the king is really coming back. And he's a king. He's a sovereign king. He's a glorious king. He's a precious, wonderful king. And in trumpets, we celebrate the truth that he's really coming back, that he really is king over heaven and king over earth. And so there's a celebration part to trumpets. In the next one, as it relates to Yom Kippur, is he's a judge. You know, I think it's interesting in Moses, in the story in Exodus 33, in which Moses is saying, show me your glory. Okay, and so the Lord puts him in the cleft of a rock, and he passes by him, and and he says, I'm the gracious God, I'm the loving God, I'm the forgiving God. And here's my character, is I'm full of love and grace and forgiveness. And then he says, yet I'm a judge. Yet I will punish and discipline. And too often, again, in the church, we want to let go of that one, of the judge. But Yom Kippur is about understanding he's a judge, understanding that we need to own where we're sinning and falling short of what he's calling us to. All right, and then the last one is Tabernacles, and it's all about his return and that he's a bridegroom God. He wants to be with us. Intimacy is how he's wired the kingdom, that love is the driving force. Intimacy is important. And in Tabernacles, he's really coming back. We're going to tabernacle with him. And so bridegroom, king, and judge are the context for the three fall feast. And so that's why I want you to be more aware and understand why in the prayer room, we're going to blow a shofar. In the prayer room, we're going to call the community to understand that he's a judge. And in the prayer room, we're going to have a sukkah or a tabernacle built to just keep it in front of us. As a prophetic eschatological community, I think the feasts are really important. And I just wanted to share this with you. I hope that's really helpful to you. Bless you.